The Second World War is a story we think we already know. Its major battles have been mapped and remapped, its heroes and villains carved into stone, its victories replayed in documentaries, films, and classrooms around the world. Most of us could list the turning points, the great invasions, the names of the commanders who pushed armies across continents like pieces on a chessboard. But beneath that familiar surface lies another war, a quieter war, a stranger war, a war fought in the margins, where logic falters, explanations fail, and the official record feels like it's hiding something just out of sight. Because for every well-known battle, there are moments that defy reason, decisions that seem impossible to explain, accidents too bizarre to accept, disappearances that still haunt historians today. It's here, in these dimly lit corners, that the ghost stories of World War II live. Stories with missing pages, stories that survived through fragments, interrogations, scattered eyewitnesses, and classified documents that only tell half the truth. In this hidden layer of the conflict, we find brilliant men suddenly acting irrationally. Legendary warships destroyed by a single spark, national heroes who vanish without a trace, submarines that slip into the deep and never return, and secret weapons programs that may or may not have achieved the unthinkable. These mysteries remind us that history is not a perfect puzzle waiting to be solved. It's a chaotic human drama, full of fear, pride, miscalculation, and the strange, unpredictable turns of fate. Tonight, we're not visiting Normandy or Stalingrad or Midway. Instead, we're stepping into the war behind the war, the eerie undercurrents that shaped events in ways historians still struggle to explain. In this investigation, we'll explore 6 enigmas that continue to baffle researchers more than 80 years later. A powerful Nazi leader who flew alone into enemy territory. A luxury ocean liner destroyed in minutes. A submarine ace who vanished without a trace. A beloved musician swallowed by fog. A supposed nuclear test hidden in the mountains, and an Arctic outpost undone by a single mistake. If you enjoy deep dives into the shadows of history, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss the mysteries ahead. Rudolf Hess was not just another Nazi official. He wasn't a mid-level bureaucrat or a forgotten name buried in the footnotes of history. For nearly 2 decades, he was Hitler's shadow, a devoted follower, a loyal fanatic, and for many years, the second most powerful man in the Third Reich. Hess had marched with Hitler during the failed beer hall putsch of 1923. He had sat beside him in prison, taking down the words that would become Mein Kampf. And when the Nazis rose to power, Hitler rewarded that loyalty by naming him Deputy Führer, a title that placed Hess at the very core of the new German Empire. But by the late 1930s, something began to shift. More ruthless men like Hermann Göring, Heinrich Himmler, and Martin Bormann started to eclipse him. Hess was loyal, but he was not cunning. He was devoted, but he was not ambitious enough to fight for power. And slowly, the inner circle began to leave him behind. As his influence faded, Hess retreated into a world of strange beliefs. He studied astrology, alternative medicine, and mystical theories about destiny. He consulted spiritualists and eccentric advisors. Even some Nazis whispered that the Deputy Führer was drifting into a world of his own imagination, and that world soon latched onto a single, dangerous idea. Hess became convinced, against all evidence, that somewhere inside Britain's aristocracy, a secret group existed, a peace faction that wanted to end the war with Germany. He imagined powerful English nobles waiting for the right messenger, someone brave enough to cross enemy lines and offer Hitler's terms. There was only one problem. This peace faction did not exist, not in the way Hess dreamed, but in his mind, he could still save Germany. He could still save Hitler. He could still make himself essential again. And so, his obsession began, a plan born in delusion. In the spring of 1941, while Germany prepared for the massive invasion of the Soviet Union, Hess convinced himself that Britain was on the verge of collapse, that one bold diplomatic gesture could bring the empire to the negotiating table. Desperate to reclaim his lost importance, he created an audacious plan. He would fly to Scotland alone and meet a man he believed was Germany's key to peace, the Duke of Hamilton. The logic was thin, the plan was reckless, and no one in the German government was told. Hess hadn't flown seriously in years. His skills were rusty, his eyesight had weakened. But he insisted on flying the mission himself. A specially modified Messerschmitt Bf 110 twin-engine fighter was prepared for him. Inside, he carried maps covered in his own handwriting, astrological charts, and a set of bizarre peace proposals. He believed the British would welcome his plan was simple and completely insane. He would take off from Germany at dusk, fly across the North Sea under the cover of darkness, land near the Duke's estate, and begin peace talks on behalf of Hitler. Except Hitler knew nothing about it. A lone flight into darkness. On the evening of May 10th, 1941, Hess took off from Augsburg airfield. He flew low to avoid British radar, navigating mostly by memory, and scattered landmarks in the fading light. For 5 long hours, this powerful figure, once one of the most feared men in Europe, sat alone in the cockpit, heading straight into enemy territory on a mission no one had sanctioned. But as he reached Scotland, things began to unravel. He misjudged his fuel, he misjudged the terrain, he misjudged the visibility. With the aircraft nearly out of fuel and no safe place to land, Hess made a desperate choice. He bailed out. He parachuted into the cold Scottish night, crashing into a field near the village of Eaglesham. He injured his ankle on landing and struggled to pull himself to his feet. It was there, stumbling in the dark, that he encountered the first person to greet him in Britain. Not a nobleman, not a diplomat, not a spy, but a Scottish farmer named David MacLean, armed with nothing more than a pitchfork. Hess introduced himself under a false name, Alfred Horn, but his accent, uniform pieces, and documents quickly told another story. The local home guard took him into custody, completely baffled by the strange, polite German officer who claimed he needed to speak urgently with the Duke of Hamilton. By morning, the truth had reached London. The Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany had fallen out of the sky and surrendered himself. Shockwaves across Europe. British officials were stunned. They interrogated him gently at first, confused about whether he was alone, whether this was a trick, or whether Germany had finally cracked under the pressure. Hess insisted the Duke of Hamilton was waiting for him. He insisted Britain wanted peace. He insisted he had come to offer a proposal that would end the war. The British quickly realized they were dealing with someone deeply detached from reality. But while they dismissed his peace plan as fantasy, they did not dismiss Hess. They interrogated him for months, searching for hidden motives, hidden messages, or hidden intelligence. Was he truly insane, or was he pretending? Even today, British interrogation files show just how seriously they took him. Hitler's fury. When news reached Hitler, the reaction was volcanic. His own deputy Führer, one of the earliest party loyalists, had flown into enemy territory without permission. Hitler feared the worst. Would Churchill pretend to negotiate with Hess? Would the Allies think Germany was collapsing from within? Would Italy or Japan lose faith? Hitler immediately ordered a propaganda strategy. Hess was mentally unstable. He had acted alone. He had no influence in government. He had lost his mind. His name was erased from Nazi publications, his portraits removed, his position transferred to Martin Bormann. The man who once sat beside Hitler now became an embarrassment the regime wished to forget. A secret mission after all. The official story held for decades. Hess acted alone. Hess was delusional. Hess went rogue. But in 2011, a 28-page statement surfaced, given by Hess's adjutant Karl-Heinz Pinch, while he was a prisoner of the Soviets. In it, he claimed that Hitler had approved the flight, or at least did not stop it. He alleged that Hitler reacted calmly when told Hess was en route to Britain, and that the plan was meant to be a deniable peace attempt. If Hess succeeded, Germany could blame him if the talks failed. If he failed, they could call him insane. Historians remain divided. Some believe Pinch's testimony was extracted under Soviet duress. Others point to eyewitness accounts claiming Hitler's rage was genuine. A few argue that the truth may lie in between. Did Hitler secretly allow the mission? Or did Hess truly break with reality? Without Hess's own explanation, he never gave one. The truth has sunk into the fog. The last question. Rudolf Hess spent the rest of his life in prison, refusing to fully explain his motives. Was he a delusional mystic, chasing an imaginary peace, a loyal soldier carrying out a hidden mission? Or something more complicated, someone spiraling into madness just as the world around him spiraled into war? More than 80 years later, historians still debate where reality ends and Hess's imagination began. And the strangest part is this. A single man, once the second most powerful figure in Nazi Germany, changed the course of his own fate, not through violence, but through a lonely, impossible flight into enemy territory. A flight that remains one of the greatest unsolved political mysteries of the entire war. Long before she became a casualty of war, the SS Normandie was a masterpiece of peace. Launched in 1935, she wasn't just a ship. She was a national statement, a floating sculpture carved from French ambition and artistic pride. At the time of her maiden voyage, she was the largest and fastest passenger liner on Earth, capable of crossing the Atlantic in record time. She won the coveted Blue Riband on her very first trip, humiliating her British rivals and stunning the maritime world. From the outside, she looked like something pulled from a dream, sleek lines, towering funnels, and a hull that cut through the ocean like a blade. But it was the inside that made her a legend. The first-class dining hall alone was an Art Deco cathedral, longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, illuminated by floor-to-ceiling pillars of glowing Lalique glass. Her salons and promenades were decorated by the greatest designers of the era. Every surface, every chair, every lamp had been crafted with the idea that France would show the world what elegance truly meant. Her passengers were a parade of wealth and power, Hollywood stars, royalty, industrial tycoons, and politicians. To sail aboard Normandy was to be seen, but her golden age would last only 4 years. A palace in exile. In late August 1939, as Europe trembled on the edge of war, Normandy arrived in New York Harbor. Days later, Germany invaded Poland, and the Second World War began. With France now at war, her greatest liner was ordered to remain in the safety of the neutral United States. She was docked at Pier 88 on the Hudson River, her engines quiet. her lights dimmed. Soon she was joined by competitors turned refugees, the British Queens, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, the other giants of the Atlantic trade. For a moment in history, the three largest ships in the world sat side by side in New York, waiting for a war none of them were built to fight. When France fell to Germany in 1940, Normandie's status grew complicated. Technically, she now belonged to the collaborationist Vichy government, and American authorities feared sabotage. Coast Guard patrols guarded the vessel, while her French skeleton crew maintained her elaborate systems, including her state-of-the-art fire suppression network. For 2 years, the great ship remained safe, quiet, gorgeous, and useless. But that peace would not survive America's entry into the war. Seized by the U.S. Navy, 5 days after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. government formally seized the Normandie under wartime powers. She was renamed USS Lafayette, a patriotic gesture acknowledging the French general who once helped America fight for its freedom. The Navy had big plans. They wanted to convert her into a troop transport capable of carrying 10,000 soldiers at a time, an entire division across the Atlantic. But American shipyards were overwhelmed, so the rushed conversion would take place right there at Pier 88. It was a scene of organized chaos, hundreds of civilian contractors working alongside sailors, furniture, art, and expensive fixtures ripped out and piled on the pier. Welders, carpenters, electricians, and planners tripping over each other, pressure mounting for a February deadline. But in the rush, safety protocols collapsed, and the most fatal oversight involved something so basic, so essential, that it still shocks historians today. Normandie's firefighting system was disabled during the work. And beyond that, her hydrants, built to French standards, were incompatible with New York Fire Department hoses. The adapters needed to fix this problem had not yet been installed. This meant one thing: if a fire broke out, the world's most luxurious liner was defenseless. The spark that ended everything. On February 9, 1942, a team of workers was dismantling decorative stanchions inside the ship's grand salon. Welder Clement Derrick used an acetylene torch to cut metal supports that once held priceless art. Sparks rained from his torch, normal in any welding job. But what wasn't normal were the thousands of kapok-filled life vests stacked nearby. Kapok is light. It floats, but it also burns like dry cotton soaked in oil. Just one spark landed in the wrong place. The pile burst into flames instantly. Workers panicked, grabbing coats and extinguishers, trying desperately to put out the fire. But the flames fed on the kapok, spreading at terrifying speed. Wind blew through open portholes, turning the blaze into a hungry storm. Alarms sounded. Smoke filled the interior, and the Normandie began to die. Navy personnel rushed to call the New York City Fire Department. Fireboats arrived quickly, but when firefighters tried to connect their hoses to the ship's hydrants, they didn't fit. The single oversight that should never have happened was now catastrophic. A fight no one could win. Firefighters had no choice but to pump water directly from the harbor and spray it into the blazing ship. Inside, the ornamental woodwork, fabrics, and paneling from the Art Deco interior became fuel. Flames shot upward through ventilation shafts and open stairways. Smoke billowed over Manhattan. Crowds gathered along the pier, watching the enormous ship glow red from within. Inside the burning hull, the temperature rose beyond control. Workers fled as the fire spread across deck after deck. But the firefighters kept pumping thousands of gallons of water into the upper levels. A necessary choice to fight the flames, but one that would doom the ship. Hours later, the fire was finally under control, but a new crisis had begun. The capsize, more than 6,000 tons of water, had been pumped into the ship. With the scuppers clogged, the water remained trapped inside. The top of the ship grew heavier and heavier, turning her into a steel skyscraper filled with water. She began to list, slowly at first, then more and more. Navy commanders tried to counterflood the opposite side, but the effort only made things worse. With a groan, a sound witnesses never forgot, the mighty liner rolled onto her port side. Water rushed through broken windows. Debris floated into the harbor. By dawn, the Normandie was lying on her side in the icy Hudson River, dead. Miraculously, only one man lost his life, but the ship that once symbolized beauty and power was now a gutted carcass, half submerged, smoke still drifting from her ruins. Accident or sabotage? Official investigations concluded it was all a tragic accident. Rushed work, disabled fire systems, poor coordination, a single spark, catastrophically bad luck. Case closed. But the waterfront whispered a different story. New York's harbor was controlled, unofficially, by the American mafia, particularly the powerful dock boss, Anthony Anastasio, and his imprisoned leader, Charles Lucky Luciano. And according to one theory, the fire was no accident at all. It was a message, a demonstration, a way for the mafia to show the US government that the docks were vulnerable and that only one organization could protect them. Whether they set the fire or merely exploited it, what happened next is undeniable history. Terrified that enemy spies could attack the port, US naval intelligence reached out to Luciano's network. The result was Operation Underworld, a secret pact with organized crime. The mafia agreed to monitor the docks, prevent strikes, identify suspicious activity, secure the waterfront. In return, Luciano's prison conditions improved. His influence surged, and eventually his sentence was commuted. Did the mafia burn the Normandie to prove a point? Or did they simply take advantage of an opportunity handed to them by a tragic accident? No one was ever charged. No definitive evidence surfaced. But more than 80 years later, many historians still see the destruction of the Normandie as one of the most suspicious accidents of the war. A spark ended her, but the truth behind that spark remains one of Puto's most enduring mysteries. In the early years of World War II, when the Battle of the Atlantic was still new and the ocean felt like a battlefield without rules, one name stood above all others in the German U-boat fleet: Günther Prien. He was young, confident, and possessed an instinct for submarine warfare that bordered on supernatural. His crew adored him, his superiors trusted him, and the German public treated him like a celebrity. In the propaganda of the day, he was described as the very embodiment of the U-boat ace, calm under pressure, fearless in attack, and guided by a strange sixth sense for where the enemy would be. But Prien didn't earn his fame through propaganda alone. He earned it through one of the most astonishing naval attacks of the entire war: the impossible raid on Scapa Flow. On the night of October 13th, 1939, just weeks after the war began, Prien guided his submarine, U-47, toward the heart of the British Royal Navy's most important anchorage, Scapa Flow. Scapa Flow, located in the Orkney Islands north of Scotland, was supposed to be impregnable. The British had blocked its entrances with sunken ships, nets, and patrols. The currents were treacherous, the channels narrow, the waters shallow. No sane commander would attempt to slip a submarine inside. No sane commander, except Günther Prien. Navigating through the moonlight, he threaded U-47 through rusting block ships and swirling tides. At one point, a wrong turn could have grounded the submarine in full view of British spotlights. But Prien kept going, pushing deeper into the naval fortress. Once inside, he found what he had risked everything to locate: the British battleship HMS Royal Oak. In the dark, Prien fired his torpedoes. The first volley hit, but the battleship didn't sink immediately. British sailors believed the explosion was internal, an accident. They didn't even sound the alarm. Prien fired again. This time, the Royal Oak erupted in flame and water. Within minutes, the massive battleship rolled over and sank, taking over 800 men with her. Before the British could respond, U-47 slipped out of Scapa Flow the same way it had entered. Silent, invisible, impossible. It was a military humiliation for Britain. For Germany, it was the first great victory of the war. Prien returned home a national hero. Hitler himself awarded him the Knight's Cross. Newspapers printed his face across the front page. Children collected cards with his portrait. His submarine, U-47, had a bull painted on its conning tower, and soon nearly every U-boat in the 7th Flotilla copied the symbol. The Bull of Scapa Flow became a myth, half legend, half man, and everyone believed he was unstoppable. The tide turns, but by early 1941, the Atlantic had become a different battlefield. The British had improved their sonar. ASDIC. Convoy escorts were better trained. New tactics were spreading through the fleet. Air patrols widened their reach. The happy time of easy U-boat hunting was fading. Still, Prien continued to push into dangerous waters. On February 20th, 1941, he received orders for his 10th Combat Patrol. U-47 left the port of Lorient in occupied France and headed into the North Atlantic. His target was a westbound convoy, OB-293. It would be the last mission the Bull of Scapa Flow would ever undertake. The attack on OB-293. On the night of March 6th, Prien and his fellow U-boat commanders moved in on the convoy. U-47 fired multiple torpedoes, reportedly hitting a massive 20,000-ton whale factory ship and sowing chaos in the convoy's ranks. British escorts rushed in, destroyers, corvettes, faster ships armed with depth charges. Two vessels in particular, HMS Wolverine and HMS Verity, took charge of the hunt. For hours, the destroyers played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the submerged U-boat. Their sonar pings echoed through the black water as they launched depth charge after depth charge. The blasts shook the sea, sending columns of water into the night sky. According to the official British report, just before dawn on March 8th, Wolverine's crew caught a brief glimpse of a conning tower breaking the surface. The submarine dove again, but it was too late. Moments later, a massive underwater explosion shook the sea. A fiery red glow rose to the surface. Oil slicks spread across the waves. Wolverine's captain radioed back. U-boat destroyed. The British believed they had sunk U-47, and for years, that was the accepted story. But they were wrong. The mystery deepens. After the war, researchers compared British battle reports with German naval records, and what they discovered changed everything. At the exact time and place where Wolverine attacked, another U-boat, UA, commanded by Hans Eckermann, was operating. Eckermann's own logbooks confirmed that he had been violently depth-charged, heavily damaged, and forced to retreat. He barely survived. The British had not been attacking U-47 at all. They had been attacking UA. U-47 wasn't there. This revelation tore a hole in the long-accepted story. If Wolverine didn't sink U-47, then who did? And more importantly, where was Prien? Theories of disappearance. Once UA's survival was confirmed, historians were forced to confront a chilling truth. U-47 simply vanished. No distress signal, no debris field, no oil slick confirmed as hers, no survivors. Just silence. Over the years, several theories emerged. One, a mechanical failure. Submarines were complex machines. A battery leak, an engine explosion, or a sudden flood could doom the vessel instantly. Mechanical failure was common in early U-boats, and often fatal. If something catastrophic happened inside U-47 at depth, the crew wouldn't have had time to send a signal. The ocean would have swallowed them whole. 2. Depth charges from another escort. While Wolverine and Verity took credit, other escorts were also attacking U-boats throughout the night. Corvettes HMS Camellia and HMS Arbutus reported patterns of depth charges against sonar contacts. Could one of their attacks have fatally damaged U-47 without them realizing it? Possibly, but no confirmed kill was ever claimed. 3. A torpedo gone wrong. This theory is the most ironic and the most disturbing. German torpedoes in early 1941 were notoriously unreliable. Some ran too deep, some detonated prematurely, and some, due to faulty magnetic pistols, circled back toward the submarine that fired them. This happened to at least 3 other U-boats during the war. If U-47 fired a torpedo in the chaos of the convoy attack, and that torpedo malfunctioned, it could have struck her own hull. A silent, brutal death. 4. The ocean itself. The North Atlantic in winter is a merciless place. Storms, rogue waves, and shifting currents could destroy a submarine without witnesses. If U-47 began to sink, even slowly, the crew would have been trapped. At those depths, pressure crushes steel like paper. A final descent into darkness. The vanishing. By mid-March, when U-47 failed to return to base, the German Navy listed her as missing. Hitler refused to announce the loss for over 2 months, fearing the psychological blow to German morale. Prien had been a national hero. Losing him was unthinkable. But eventually, even propaganda couldn't hide the truth. U-47 was gone. Prien was gone. The bull of Scapa Flow had vanished into the black waters he once ruled, and to this day, no wreck has ever been found. What happened in those dark waters? More than 80 years later, the fate of U-47 remains one of the ocean's great unsolved mysteries. Theories abound, but evidence does not. All we know is this: a legend sailed into the night and never returned. By the early 1940s, Glenn Miller wasn't just a musician. He was a phenomenon. His songs didn't just entertain, they defined the era. In the Mood, Moonlight Serenade, Chattanooga Choo Choo, these weren't just hits. They were the soundtrack of American life. They played at weddings, at county fairs, in smoky dance halls, on radios in small-town kitchens, and in jukeboxes across the country. From 1939 to 1942, Glenn Miller was the best-selling recording artist in the United States. His orchestra's sound, a smooth clarinet-led reed section, was instantly recognizable. America was in love with it. For many, Miller's music was comfort, hope, and escape in a world spiraling toward war. And then, when he reached the peak of his fame, when he was earning the modern equivalent of tens of millions of dollars a year, Glenn Miller did something almost no one saw coming. He gave it all up. A superstar walks away from stardom. In 1942, with the US now drawn fully into the war, Miller petitioned the military for a special assignment. He wasn't drafted. He was too old. He volunteered. His argument was simple: I can do more for the war with a trombone than with a rifle. The Army Air Forces agreed, commissioning him as a captain. Soon, Miller began building what would become the Army Air Forces Orchestra, 50 musicians handpicked to lift the morale of American servicemen. The result was extraordinary. The band performed on bases across the US, recorded radio broadcasts that reached millions, and traveled from one training camp to another, bringing energy, humor, and a touch of home to soldiers preparing to cross the ocean. By 1944, Miller and his orchestra were sent overseas. They played in England, often in cold hangars, overcrowded hospitals, and makeshift stages built near airfields. Troops loved them. Many soldiers later said that for a few minutes, Miller's music made them forget where they were or what they were about to face. He had given up fame, but he had gained something bigger. He became the soundtrack of the war, a mission to Paris. In December 1944, Paris had just been liberated. Glenn Miller planned a Christmas broadcast there, one that would reach tens of thousands of American troops. The band was scheduled to travel separately, while Miller would go ahead to finalize arrangements. But the winter weather was terrible. Fog blanketed much of England and the Channel. Icy winds cut visibility to almost nothing. Miller's official military transport was cancelled for safety reasons. For most, that would have been the end of it, but Glenn Miller wasn't most people. Determined to keep his promise to the troops, Miller accepted an offer from Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basil, who had arranged a flight on a small, single-engine UC-64 Norseman. It was an informal flight, technically unauthorized, but in wartime Europe, such shortcuts were common. The pilot was Flight Officer John Morgan, a capable aviator used to difficult conditions, but even he knew the risks. Still, shortly before 2 p.m. on December 15th, 1944, the little plane lifted off from RAF Twinwood Farm and disappeared into the thick grey mist. Those who waved goodbye from the runway later said they watched the aircraft vanish into the fog as if it had been swallowed whole. Into the fog, the Norseman crossed into the English Channel and was never seen again. There was no distress call, no radar contact, no radio report, and no debris ever found. At first, no one was even sure the plane had departed. Miller's band arrived in Paris and waited, until they realized something was wrong. Because the flight was off the books, it took military officials over a week to confirm the disappearance. On Christmas Eve, the world learned that Glenn Miller, America's most beloved band leader, was missing. The news stunned the nation. In a war filled with tragedy, this loss felt strange, personal. The man whose songs helped millions survive the darkest moments of the conflict had himself vanished into darkness. The official explanation. After the war, investigators looked at the most likely cause, weather-related engine failure. The Norseman plane had a known flaw. Its carburetor could ice up in cold, damp conditions, starving the engine of power. Combine that with the thick fog over the Channel, and the picture becomes grim. Icing in the carburetor pilot disorientation, known as vertigo loss of altitude, a crash into freezing water, aircraft breaking apart on impact, immediate sinking. The Channel is deep and unforgiving. Planes lost, they often vanish without a trace. This explanation is tragic, but simple, and for decades, it was accepted as the official truth. But then, another story emerged, the friendly fire theory. In the 1980s, a British RAF veteran named Fred Shaw came forward with a startling claim. On December 15th, the same day Miller disappeared, Shaw said he was on a Lancaster bomber, returning from a cancelled raid. Standard procedure required crews to jettison unused bombs over a designated area of the channel before landing. Shaw claimed that as his crew released their bombs, he saw a small, single-engine aircraft beneath them, flying low through the fog. Moments later, he said the small plane was caught in the explosions and spiraled into the sea. For decades, this story fueled one of the most compelling theories about Miller's disappearance: that his plane may have been accidentally destroyed by friendly fire. It's dramatic, it's tragic, and it feels almost too perfect. But like all wartime stories, it comes with problems. The problems with Shaw's claim. Historians and aviation experts have found several issues with the friendly fire explanation. Visibility that day was extremely poor, so poor that identifying another aircraft from thousands of feet up would have been nearly impossible. Shaw's squadron's jettison zone did not perfectly line up with the Norseman's presumed flight path. Bomb jettison reports from the RAF don't mention small aircraft sightings. No other crew member from Shaw's plane ever confirmed the story. Shaw insisted he was telling the truth. Historians remain divided. Could he have seen a different plane? Could his memory have blurred over time? Or did something truly horrifying happen? A tragedy buried in paperwork and wartime confusion? There's no definitive answer. A legend swallowed by fog. What makes the Glenn Miller case so haunting is not just the disappearance, it's the lack of closure. No wreckage, no remains, no final message. A plane that should have been easy to track simply vanished. Miller's wife never received answers. His orchestra mourned a leader who vanished on the way to bring them hope. And America lost the voice that had carried it through the war. The fog that covered the English Channel that day has never truly lifted from the story. Was it weather? Was it mechanical failure? Friendly fire? Or something else entirely? No one can say. All we know is that the man who defined the sound of an era disappeared into the grey winter sky, and the ocean kept its secret. By late 1944, the world lived under a growing shadow. The terrifying possibility that Nazi Germany might be close to developing an atomic bomb. It wasn't paranoia. Germany had been the first to discover nuclear fission in 1938. German physicists were among the best in the world. And as the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, they found scattered research papers, uranium stockpiles, and abandoned laboratories. It raised a chilling question. How close were the Nazis to building a weapon like the one the United States was racing to complete? The Manhattan Project assumed the worst. They believed Germany was working furiously, secretly, toward a bomb of its own. Entire Allied strategy sessions were shaped by the fear that Hitler might unleash a nuclear nightmare. But the truth was far more complicated. Germany's nuclear program was a mess behind the scenes. The German atomic effort was fragmented, underfunded, and crippled by politics. At the center was physicist Werner Heisenberg, one of the greatest scientific minds of the century. Yet his team was focused not on a bomb, but on a nuclear reactor, and even that project was plagued by shortages, arguments, and confusion. They lacked enriched uranium, they lacked manpower, they lacked coordination. By winter 1944, they hadn't even achieved a self-sustaining chain reaction. To the Allies, these shortcomings came as a massive relief. But there was one place, one region, that refused to fit neatly into the tidy narrative of German failure. A place wrapped in secrecy, a place controlled not by the German army, but by the SS, a place called Ohrdruf, the secret tunnels of Thuringia. in central Germany near the town of Ohrdruf in the state of Thuringia, the SS oversaw a vast underground construction project. Slave laborers from concentration camps were forced to carve tunnels, chambers, and entire subterranean complexes into the mountainside. Thousands died there. Few who survived ever spoke openly about what they had seen. Historians still debate the purpose of the complex. Some believe it was intended for weapons development. Others think it was a hideout for Nazi leaders. Some claim it was a production site for advanced technology. But among the most controversial theories is this, that in March 1945, just weeks before the end of the war, the SS tested a prototype nuclear device at Ohrdruf. Not a full-scale atomic bomb like the one dropped on Hiroshima. Something smaller, cruder, a hybrid device, part conventional explosive, part nuclear experiment. A weapon that might explain the strange events witnessed that night, the night of the alleged test. According to multiple local civilians, including a woman named Clara Koenig, sometimes recorded as Clara Kohler in early accounts, something extraordinary happened on the night of March 4th, 1945. She described a brilliant flash of light, as if 100 lightning bolts struck at once. The sky glowed red, then yellow. Oh, shockwave rattled windows miles away. In the hours that followed, she suffered nosebleeds, headaches, nausea, ringing ears, symptoms modern scientists associate with exposure to intense blast pressure and possibly radiation. Other witnesses recalled a strange haze drifting across the valley and soldiers shouting for civilians to stay indoors. The next morning, the SS sealed off the area. The bodies. If the flashes and shockwaves were strange, what happened afterward was horrifying. A forced laborer named Hans Tümmler later claimed he was ordered, along with other prisoners, to help load charred, hairless bodies onto trucks. The corpses were reportedly burned, their skin peeled or blasted away. He recalled the SS officers whispering that a new weapon had been tested and that the world would talk about it. Other testimonies, fragmented, inconsistent, but deeply unsettling, echo the same pattern. Burned corpses, missing clothing, strange wounds, SS secrecy and urgency. For decades, historians dismissed these stories as rumors born in chaos. But then came something far harder to ignore. A report sent directly to Stalin. In March 1945, Soviet intelligence sent Joseph Stalin a classified report about 2 explosions in Thuringia. The report claimed the blasts had radioactive effects. Prisoners in the testing area were vaporized or killed instantly. The weapon could hamper the Red Army's advance. The Soviets were so alarmed that they rushed to capture the region. Soviet troops arrived just days later and immediately cordoned off the site. For years, the area remained under strict Soviet control. What did they find there? What did they take back to Moscow? The records remain incomplete. But the mystery didn't end with the Soviets. Karlsch's hybrid mini-nuke theory. In 2005, German historian Rainer Karlsch published a book titled Hitler's Bomb, arguing that the SS had conducted at least one nuclear-related test. Not a Hiroshima-style bomb, but a hybrid device that used conventional explosives to compress small amounts of nuclear material. Karlsch cited technician testimony, SS archives, construction records, and soil analysis from the site. His researchers found unusual levels of cesium-137 and cobalt-60, isotopes associated with nuclear activity. Karlsch argued that while Germany lacked enough uranium for a full bomb, a crude device might still have produced a partial nuclear reaction. The scientific community immediately pushed back. Mainstream dismissal. Most historians and physicists reject the idea that the Nazis were anywhere near nuclear capability. Their arguments are strong. 1. Not enough enriched uranium. Germany's uranium supply was tiny, nowhere near the kilograms required even for a small nuclear detonation. 2. The farm hall recordings. In 1945, the Allies secretly recorded conversations among captured German scientists, including Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Kurt Diebner. When news of Hiroshima reached them, they were stunned. Their comments showed disbelief, confusion, lack of understanding, and total shock that an atomic bomb had been achieved. If they had tested anything, even a crude device, their reactions would have been different. 3. Soil contamination is inconsistent. When Germany's top physics institute tested the Ohrdruf soil, they concluded the radioactive isotopes were left over from atmospheric nuclear tests in the 1950s to 60s or fallout from the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. According to them, there was no evidence of a 1945 nuclear event. So, what happened at Ohrdruf? Like many late-war Nazi projects, the truth is tangled in secrecy, chaos, and destruction. There are 3 main possibilities. 1. A fuel air explosion. Fuel air bombs can produce massive blasts, shock waves, and fireballs that resemble nuclear detonations, minus the radiation. The SS may have been testing advanced explosives, and civilians misinterpreted what they saw. 2. Misremembered events. By 1945, Thuringia was bombed, shelled, and covered in retreating troops. Witness testimony collected decades later may have merged events, memories, and fear. 3. Something we still don't fully understand. A secret program run by the SS, burned bodies, a Soviet report referencing radioactive effects, unusual tunnels, witnesses describing blinding flashes. Individually, these details can be dismissed. Together they form a puzzle historians still struggle to complete. Was it a desperate test of a last-minute superweapon, a simple explosion wrapped in decades of rumors, or the shadow of something darker buried before the war even ended? Whatever happened at Ohrdruf that night, one thing is certain. The truth, like the flash that lit up the valley, remains hidden behind layers of darkness. In the frozen world of the far Arctic, where the sun vanishes for months and the wind cuts like knives, Germany fought a secret war that almost no one knew about. It wasn't a battle of tanks or ships. It wasn't a clash of armies. It was a battle for weather. For the U-boats prowling the North Atlantic, accurate forecasts meant survival. A storm could scatter convoys or sink submarines. Ice could block escape routes. Fog could shield an attack or doom it. The Allies had weather stations in Greenland, Canada, and Iceland. Germany needed its own network. And so the German Navy turned to an audacious plan, placing hidden weather stations deep inside the Arctic Circle. The most ambitious of these missions was Operation Schatzgräber, Treasure Hunter. But the treasure wasn't gold, it was data, a journey to the ends of the earth. In September 1943, a small German expedition, about a dozen men, slipped through Allied patrols aboard a long-range vessel and reached Alexandra Land, an uninhabited island in the Franz Josef Land archipelago, far north of Russia. This was a place few humans had ever set foot on. The land was barren, the sky was empty, the wind howled day and night. Temperatures plunged far below zero. This was not a place built for life. And yet, the men of Schatzgräber would call it home for almost a year. They built prefabricated huts, installed sensitive meteorological equipment, and laid out a defensive minefield around the camp, both to deter Soviet patrols and to warn off curious polar bears, which occasionally wandered close. Their supply line came from the sky. The Luftwaffe used massive Focke-Wulf Condor aircraft to parachute crates of food, fuel, and mail onto the tundra. Each delivery felt like a lifeline from another planet. The rest of the time, the men were completely alone. Life in darkness. As winter set in, the sun disappeared below the horizon and did not return for months. The station was swallowed by 24-hour darkness, freezing storms, and crushing silence. Inside the cramped huts, the routine became monotonous. Record weather readings, send coded transmissions, fix frozen equipment, eat canned food, try not to think too much, try not to go insane. Morale was difficult to maintain. The men played cards, read worn paperback novels, and told stories late into the night. But the isolation gnawed at them. Even small problems magnified into crises. And above all, one craving dominated their conversations: fresh food. Their entire diet consisted of canned meat, canned vegetables, canned everything. The dream of a real meal became almost an obsession. Which is why, in the spring of 1944, when one of the men spotted a massive polar bear wandering near the camp, everything changed. The hunt polar bears were normally a threat. They had been seen circling the camp more than once. But now, the men saw something else: fresh meat. Two of the crew decided to hunt it. After a tense afternoon of tracking the giant animal across the snow, they brought it down. They dragged the carcass back to camp, triumphant. The cook, who was also a meteorological assistant, prepared a feast. Thick steaks were carved from the bear's meat. The men celebrated. For the first time in months, they tasted something that wasn't canned. But in their excitement, they made one fatal mistake. They didn't cook the meat long enough. The first symptoms. It started with the cook. Hours after the meal, he felt feverish. His muscles cramped. His legs burned with pain. He assumed it was exhaustion. Then another man fell ill. Then another. Then nearly everyone who had eaten the meat. They were struck by trichinosis, a parasitic infection caused by eating raw or undercooked bear meat. Tiny larvae entered their bodies, burrowing into muscles and causing agony. Within days, the weather station became a medical disaster zone. The men could barely move. Some couldn't stand. Others drifted in and out of consciousness. One man screamed that it felt like his muscles were on fire from the inside. Only the medic, who had wisely avoided the meal, remained healthy enough to treat them. The vital weather reports stopped. Transmission schedules collapsed. The station was dying, and so were the men. A desperate call for rescue. The medic managed to send a frantic radio message to German command. They understood immediately that the station could no longer function. The response was daring. A Focke-Wulf Condor, one of the largest aircraft in the world, was dispatched from Norway with a doctor and medical supplies. The plan was for the doctor to parachute into the camp. But when the aircraft arrived over Alexandra Land, the pilot looked down and made a bold decision. He would attempt to land. No proper runway existed, just uneven tundra, snow, and rocks. But the pilot took the risk. The giant plane touched down hard, damaging its landing gear. Now the doctor and the pilot were stranded with the sick crew. A race against time. For several days, the medic and the newly arrived doctor worked non-stop to stabilize the men. At the same time, the crew, still barely able to walk, helped repair the damaged aircraft. They built a makeshift runway by clearing rocks, flattening snow, and marking a path with scraps of equipment. Every step was agony. Every hour mattered. Trichinosis, can kill, and the men were deteriorating. Finally, after frantic repairs, the Condor was considered airworthy enough, a description that inspired little confidence but offered the only chance of survival. The takeoff. The entire team, weak, feverish, and barely conscious, was loaded aboard the plane. The pilot throttled the engines, pushing the overloaded aircraft across the makeshift runway. It hit bumps, it skidded, it struggled to gain speed. For a moment, the plane seemed too heavy, too damaged, too slow. It bounced dangerously close to a minefield the crew had forgotten about in their haste, and then, just barely, the Condor lifted into the Arctic sky. The men collapsed into their seats, some sobbing, some delirious, some too weak to speak. But they were alive. Operation Schatzgräber had ended. The station, equipment, huts, mines, everything was abandoned exactly as it stood. A secret defeated by a single mistake. For decades, the Schatzgräber station remained untouched, hidden in the ice, untouched even by Soviet patrols. When Russian researchers excavated it in 2016, they found the camp eerily preserved. A top-secret Nazi operation, a crucial weather outpost, a sophisticated Arctic base. All defeated not by enemy forces, sabotage, or Allied intelligence, but by one undercooked meal and one polar bear. In the vast, frozen emptiness of the high Arctic, where the sun disappears for months and the winds can strip flesh from bone, Germany fought a strange but vital battle. A battle against the weather itself. For the U-boats prowling the North Atlantic, weather was life and death. A calm sea meant safe travel. A storm meant disaster. A shift in temperature could hide a convoy in fog or expose it to hunters above. Accurate forecasts were a weapon almost as important as torpedoes. The Allies had weather stations scattered across Greenland, Iceland, and northern Canada. Germany had almost none. So the Kriegsmarine came up with a daring plan: create a chain of secret Arctic weather stations, hundreds of miles inside enemy territory. And the most ambitious, most remote of them all, would be built on a desolate island called Alexandra Land, deep within the Franz Josef Land archipelago. Its code name was Schatzgräber, treasure hunter. The treasure was not gold. It was data, cold, precise, life-saving meteorological data, a journey to nowhere. In September 1943, a small German team, meteorologists, radio operators, technicians, and one medic, made the perilous trip north. They slipped past Allied patrols in the Arctic Ocean and landed on Alexandra Land, a world of rock, ice, and silence. The island was completely uninhabited. There were no trees, no shelter, no landmarks, just endless white stretching in all directions. It felt like the end of the world. The team quickly built prefabricated huts, installed antennas, unpacked scientific instruments, and, as a precaution, laid a ring of landmines around the small camp. Polar bears, huge, unpredictable, and fearless, were a constant threat. Their only connection to civilization came from the sky. Long-range Focke-Wulf Condor aircraft that dropped crates of supplies and letters onto the tundra. Otherwise, the men lived in total isolation. The darkness comes. Winter slammed into the island like a hammer. The sun dipped below the horizon and didn't return for months. The sky remained black. The winds roared. Temperatures plunged so low that metal cracked and breath froze on contact. Inside the huts, the men followed a strict, monotonous routine, recording temperatures and pressure, collecting wind readings, maintaining radios, sending coded weather reports, melting snow for water, repairing equipment that constantly broke in the cold. They ate canned meat canned vegetables and canned bread. They slept in cramped bunks. They read the same handful of books over and over. Slowly, the isolation began to gnaw at them. They missed sunlight. They missed fresh air. They missed anything fresh at all. Conversation drifted constantly toward food, real food, meat, bread, fruit, anything that wasn't sealed in a tin. The polar bear. By spring 1944, the sun had returned. Spirits lifted slightly. The moon-white landscape shimmered in 24-hour daylight. Then came the moment they had all secretly hoped for. A huge polar bear wandered near the camp. Normally, this would have been a threat. But after months of nothing but rations, the men saw not danger, but dinner. 2 of them grabbed rifles and tracked the animal across the ice. After a tense hunt, they brought it down. Cheers erupted when the carcass returned to camp. The cook, who was also one of the station's meteorological assistants, carved thick steaks from the bear's body. The smell of cooking meat filled the hut. The men were ecstatic. For the first time in months, they sat down to a feast. But in their hunger and excitement, they made a fatal mistake. The meat wasn't cooked long enough. The invisible enemy. The first symptoms appeared with the cook: fever, cramps, sharp pains in the legs, violent chills. At first, he brushed it off as fatigue. Then another man collapsed. Then another. Within days, nearly every man who had eaten the bear fell seriously ill. Their muscles felt like they were tearing from the inside. Their faces swelled. They struggled to breathe. Some hallucinated. Others could not stand. The diagnosis was clear to the medic. Trichinosis, a parasitic infection caused by eating raw or undercooked bear meat, which is often filled with Trichinella spiralis larvae. It was agony, and if untreated, it could be fatal. Within a week, the station could no longer function. Weather reports stopped. Maintenance tasks became impossible. The men lay in their bunks, writhing in pain. The medic was now the only fully healthy adult on the island. He sent a desperate radio message for help. The rescued German command understood the gravity of the situation immediately. Schatzgräber was one of their most valuable Arctic assets. Losing it meant losing critical intelligence. They dispatched a Focke-Wulf Condor carrying a doctor and medical supplies. The original plan was for the doctor to parachute onto the island. But when the pilot saw the situation from the air, he made an incredible choice. He decided to land. The Condor was massive, far larger and heavier than any aircraft meant for Arctic terrain. The island had no runway, only uneven permafrost. Still, the pilot brought the big aircraft down. It slammed into the ground, bounced, and skidded across the tundra. The landing gear buckled, but it held. The doctor and pilot were now stranded alongside the sick men they had come to save. A race against time. For days, the medic and doctor fought to keep the men alive. They distributed medicine, attempted to reduce fevers, and treated the worst cases. Meanwhile, the others, barely able to walk, worked to repair the damaged aircraft. They built a makeshift runway by flattening snow, removing rocks, and marking a straight path. Every movement was agony. Every breath was painful. The men knew they were racing death. Finally, after days of frantic work, the Condor was declared barely flight-worthy. There was no guarantee it would lift off, but staying meant dying. The escape. The men were loaded onto the Condor. Delirious, sweating, and in pain, they collapsed into their seats. The engines roared to life. The aircraft lurched forward. The makeshift runway was uneven. The plane bounced violently. For a terrifying moment, it veered toward the minefield they had laid months earlier. Then Inch by inch, the aircraft gained speed. The nose lifted, the wings caught air, and the Condor rose into the pale Arctic sky, carrying every man away from the dying station. Schatzgräber was abandoned instantly. Its huts, equipment, and minefields were left behind in the snow. A secret undone by a single mistake. For years, the station remained frozen exactly as the men had left it, a time capsule sealed in ice. When Russian researchers reached it in 2016, they found tins of food, equipment, and even handwritten notes preserved by the cold. A top-secret wartime outpost, a vital meteorological station, a mission that had evaded Allied detection. All of it undone not by enemy action, not by sabotage, not by a security breach, but by one mistake and one polar bear.